What happens when one of the most beloved icons in entertainment walks onto a talk show stage, only to be blindsided by a host who thinks she can say whatever she wants? In just 33 seconds, a single comment would turn a friendly interview into an explosive showdown that nobody saw coming, and Joy Behar would learn the hard way that even the kindest person has a breaking point. This was supposed to be a celebration. Dolly Parton, the queen of country music, the woman who built an empire on kindness and talent, was making an appearance to talk about her latest projects. The audience was packed, the energy was high, and everyone expected the usual warm conversation that Dolly brings to every interview. But what they got instead was a masterclass in how quickly respect can crumble when a host forgets who they're talking to. The interview started normally enough. Dolly walked out in her signature style, all smiles and grace, waving to the roaring crowd. She sat down across from Joy, who seemed friendly at first, welcoming her with the standard pleasantries. They talked about music, about Dolly's childhood, about her theme park. The audience was eating it up, laughing at Dolly's stories, applauding her humility. Everything seemed perfect. But then something shifted. You could feel it in the air, that subtle change in tone when someone decides they're going to push boundaries. Joy leaned back in her chair, and there was this look in her eyes, like she was about to say something she thought was clever. She had that smirk, that expression that says, "I'm about to make a point, and everyone's going to applaud me for it." "So, Dolly," Joy said, her voice taking on a different edge, "let's talk about something real for a minute. All this sweetness, all this kindness you're known for, don't you think it's a little bit, I don't know, calculated? Like maybe it's just part of the brand?" The audience went quiet. You could hear it, that collective intake of breath when everyone realizes something uncomfortable just happened. Dolly's smile didn't fade, but there was a flicker in her eyes, a moment where you could see her processing what had just been said to her. "Well," Dolly said slowly, her voice still warm but with steel underneath, "I don't think kindness needs to be calculated, honey. It's just how I was raised. It's who I am." Joy wasn't backing down. She leaned forward, pressing the point like she was doing some kind of hard-hitting journalism. "But come on, nobody's that nice all the time. What's the real Dolly like when the cameras are off? Are you actually this sweet, or is it an act?" There it was, the first real crack in the facade of a friendly interview. Joy had just called one of the most genuine people in entertainment fake on national television to her face, and she said it like she was doing everyone a favor by asking the tough questions. Dolly shifted in her seat. Her hands, usually so animated when she talks, went still. "I can assure you," she said, and her voice was calm but firm, "that what you see is what you get. I've never pretended to be something I'm not. I've built my entire career on being honest with people." The audience started to clap, supporting Dolly, but Joy talked right over the applause. Okay, but let's be real about something else. Your look, the wigs, the makeup, the whole thing you've got going on. Don't you think maybe it's time to tone it down a little? I mean, you're not 20 anymore." The gasp from the audience was audible this time. Even the crew members standing off to the side looked uncomfortable. Joy had just insulted Dolly's appearance, her age, her choices, everything that makes Dolly who she is, and she did it with this casual cruelty that she seemed to think was acceptable. Dolly's expression changed. The warmth was still there, but now there was something else, something that said you just crossed a line. "Joy," she said, and the way she said the name carried weight. "I dress the way I dress because I like it. I wear wigs because they're convenient and fun. And I do my makeup the way I want because it makes me happy. I've never asked anyone else to live by my standards, and I don't appreciate being told I should live by yours." You could feel the shift in the room. The audience wasn't just uncomfortable anymore. They were getting angry on Dolly's behalf. This wasn't an interview anymore. This was an attack, and everyone could see it except apparently Joy, who seemed to think she was winning some kind of debate. Joy laughed, actually laughed, like Dolly had just said something amusing. "Oh, don't be so sensitive. I'm just asking questions here. That's what we do on this show. We have real conversations." "Real conversations," Dolly repeated, and there was an edge to her voice now that hadn't been there before. "Is that what you call this? Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like you invited me here just so. You could tear me down on your stage." Joy waved her hand dismissively, like Dolly was overreacting. "See, this is what I'm talking about. You can't handle a little criticism. You're so used to everyone kissing your feet that when someone actually challenges you, you fall apart." The audience started booing, actually booing Joy on her own show, but she kept going, digging herself deeper with every word. And another thing, this whole Dolly Parton persona, the dumb blonde act, we all know you're smarter than that. Why do you play into these stereotypes? Don't you think you're setting women back by presenting yourself this way? That was it. That was the moment where Dolly's patience, which had been stretched to its absolute limit, finally snapped. She stood up, and the movement was so sudden, so definitive, that everyone in the studio froze. "I have sat here," Dolly said, her voice clear and strong, carrying across the entire studio, "and I have listened to you insult my character, my appearance, my intelligence, and my choices. I came on this show as a guest, with respect for you and your platform. But you have shown me nothing but disrespect from the moment you decided to turn this interview into your personal attack session." Joy tried to interject, tried to laugh it off. "Oh, come on, Dolly. Don't be so—" "I'm not finished," Dolly said, and the authority in her voice stopped Joy mid-sentence. "You talk about having real conversations, but what you're doing isn't conversation. It's cruelty. And you're doing it because you think you can, because you think your platform gives you the right to treat people however you want." The camera operators were scrambling, trying to figure out if they should keep filming. The producers were probably losing their minds in the control room. This wasn't just a tense interview anymore. This was a full-blown confrontation, and it was happening live. I have spent my entire life building a career on kindness, on lifting people up, on making people feel good, Dolly continued, and you sit here in your chair and mock that. You call it calculated. You call it an act. You suggest it's somehow less valuable because it's not mean-spirited like what you're doing right now. Joy's face was turning red. She was trying to regain control of her own show, but she'd lost it the moment she decided to attack someone who had done nothing but show her grace. "Now wait just a minute," Joy started, her voice rising. "This is my show, and I'll ask whatever questions I want to ask. And I'll decide when I've had enough," Dolly shot back. "You think because you have a microphone and an audience that you can say whatever you want without consequences. You think you can invite someone onto your show and humiliate them for entertainment. But I'm not going to sit here and be your punching bag." The audience erupted in applause. They were standing now, cheering for Dolly, and you could see Joy's face going through a range of emotions as she realized she'd completely misjudged the situation. She'd thought she could push Dolly around, thought she could score points by being edgy and provocative, but instead she'd just shown everyone exactly who she was. "You know what your problem is?" Dolly said, and her voice was still strong, but there was sadness in it too. "Your problem is that you think being mean is the same thing as being honest. You think tearing people down is the same thing as asking tough questions. But it's not. It's just being cruel, and trying to dress it up as journalism or entertainment doesn't change that." Joy stood up now too, trying to assert some kind of authority. "If you can't handle the heat, maybe you shouldn't be in the public eye." "I've been in the public eye for over 50 years, Dolly said quietly, and the quiet was somehow more powerful than if she'd shouted. "I've handled more heat than you can possibly imagine. I've faced criticism. I've faced skepticism. I've faced people who wanted to see me fail. But I've never, in all those years, sat across from someone who was quite as determined to be nasty for no good reason as you are right now. She reached down and unclipped her microphone, the sound echoing through the suddenly silent studio. I was taught that if you can't say something nice, you shouldn't say anything at all. But I'm going to break that rule, just this once, to tell you that you ought to be ashamed of yourself. The clip made a sharp sound as it came free, and Dolly set it carefully on the arm of her chair. It was such a deliberate gesture, so controlled, and it said more than words could about how done she was with this entire situation. Joy's voice went shrill. "You can't just walk off my show. We're in the middle of an interview." "No," Dolly corrected her. "You're in the middle of an ambush. I'm leaving." She turned to the audience, and her face softened immediately. "I want to thank all of you for being here, and for your support," she said, addressing them directly. "You all have been wonderful. I'm sorry you had to witness this, but I hope you understand why I can't stay." The audience gave her a standing ovation that seemed to shake the walls. People were crying, actually crying, moved by watching someone stand up for themselves with such dignity and grace. And through it all, Joy just stood there, her face a mixture of shock and anger, as if she couldn't believe this was actually happening. "This is ridiculous," Joy said, her voice desperate now. "You're being completely unprofessional." Dolly turned back to look at her, and the look on her face was almost pitying. Unprofessional is inviting someone onto your show under the pretense of a friendly interview and then spending the entire time trying to make them feel small. Unprofessional is using your position to bully someone. Unprofessional is what you've been doing for the last 20 minutes. She started walking toward the exit, her heels clicking on the floor, each step deliberate and dignified. The cameras followed her, and you could see Joy in the background, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to find something to say that would fix this. But there was nothing. There was no coming back from what she'd done. "You're making a huge mistake," Joy called after her. "You're going to regret this." Dolly paused, just for a moment, her hand on the curtain that led backstage. She looked back over her shoulder, and there was something in her expression that was both sad and resolute. "The only thing I regret," she said clearly, "is that I didn't walk out sooner." And then she was gone, disappearing behind the curtain, leaving Joy standing alone on her stage with a shocked audience and a show that had just imploded spectacularly. The producers were scrambling to cut to commercial, but not before the cameras caught Joy's face. And you could see it all there. The realization of what she'd just done. The understanding that she'd pushed too far. Because here's what Joy didn't understand. What people like her never seem to understand. Kindness isn't weakness. Grace isn't the same as being a pushover. And when you mistake someone's warmth for an inability to stand up for themselves, you're going to learn a very hard lesson. Dolly Parton had spent decades being kind to everyone she met. She'd built an empire, yes, but she'd built it on genuine goodness, on actually caring about people, on using her platform to lift others up. She didn't need to tear anyone down to feel important. She didn't need to humiliate guests to feel powerful. She just needed to be herself, and that had been more than enough. Joy, on the other hand, had just shown everyone watching exactly what happens when you confuse having a platform with having the right to abuse it. She'd thought she could score points, thought she could make herself look tough and edgy by going after someone beloved, but all she'd done was reveal her own insecurity, her own need to tear down something beautiful, because she couldn't create it herself. The audience was still on their feet, still applauding even though Dolly was gone. They were applauding the courage it took to walk away. They were applauding the dignity she'd shown in the face of unprovoked hostility. They were applauding because they'd just watched someone stand up for themselves without losing who they were in the process. And Joy? Joy was left standing on her stage, alone, facing an audience that was no longer on her side, if they ever really had been. She'd wanted to create a memorable moment, wanted to make headlines, wanted to be talked about. Well, she'd succeeded, but not in the way she'd hoped. The thing is, when you attack someone like Dolly Parton, someone who has spent their entire life being genuinely kind and good, you're not exposing them as fake. You're exposing yourself as someone who can't recognize or appreciate authenticity when it's sitting right in front of you. You're showing the world that you're so caught up in cynicism and meanness that you've forgotten what real human decency looks like. Dolly had given Joy every opportunity to change course. She'd tried to answer the questions with grace. She'd tried to deflect with humor. She'd tried to gently but firmly set boundaries. But Joy kept pushing, kept crossing lines, kept trying to provoke a reaction. And she got one. Just not the one she wanted. What Joy wanted was for Dolly to get flustered, to get defensive in a way that would make her look petty, or unable to take criticism. What she got instead was a masterclass in how to stand up for yourself without stooping to someone else's level. Dolly never insulted Joy. She never called her names. She never tried to hurt her the way Joy had tried to hurt Dolly. She simply stated facts, set boundaries, and removed herself from a toxic situation. That's the kind of strength that comes from real confidence, from really knowing who you are. Dolly didn't need to prove anything to Joy or to anyone watching. She already knew her worth. She already knew that her kindness wasn't a weakness, that her choices weren't up for debate, that her life and career spoke for themselves. Joy had made the fundamental mistake of thinking that niceness equals naivety. She'd looked at Dolly's warm persona and assumed there was nothing underneath it. No steel, no backbone, no willingness to fight back when pushed too far. She'd thought she could poke and prod and insult, and Dolly would just sit there and take it with a smile. But Dolly had been in this business longer than Joy had been alive. She'd faced down record executives who tried to control her music. She'd navigated an industry that wanted to put her in a box. She'd built a business empire while staying true to herself. She'd handled criticism and controversy and skepticism from people far more formidable than a talk show host with an inflated sense of her own importance. The audience knew it. You could see it in their faces as they watched Dolly walk off that stage. They weren't just supporting her because she was famous, or because they liked her music. They were supporting her because they'd just witnessed something rare and powerful. They'd watched someone refuse to be diminished, refuse to play along with cruelty disguised as conversation, refuse to let someone else's need to feel superior turn them into a victim. Joy tried to regain control as the producers finally managed to cut to commercial. She was talking fast, trying to explain to the remaining audience members what had just happened, trying to spin it as Dolly being unable to handle honest questions. But nobody was buying it. The audience had been there. They'd heard every word. They knew exactly what had happened, and they knew who was at fault. This was supposed to be Joy's show, her platform, her moment of control. But in trying to tear down someone else, she'd only succeeded in exposing her own flaws. She'd revealed herself to be exactly what Dolly had called her out for being, someone who mistakes cruelty for strength, who confuses attacking others with asking tough questions. The commercial break couldn't last forever, though it probably felt like it to Joy. When they came back, she tried to continue the show, tried to bring out the next guest, tried to act like what had just happened was somehow normal or acceptable. But the energy in the room had changed. The audience was different now. They'd lost respect for her. And you can't just get that back with a smile and a segue to the next segment. Because what people had just seen was a choice. They'd seen Joy choose to be cruel when she could have been kind. They'd seen her choose to attack when she could have had a genuine conversation. They'd seen her choose to try to humiliate someone when she could have celebrated them. And they'd seen Dolly choose to maintain her dignity, choose to stand up for herself, choose to walk away rather than participate in something ugly. Those choices revealed everything about both women, about who they were, what they valued, how they treated other people. And in that revelation, there was only one person who came out looking good, and it wasn't the host. Dolly had shown that you can be kind without being weak, that you can be gracious without being a doormat, that you can give people chances to do better, but you don't have to stick around when they refuse to take those chances. She'd shown that real strength isn't about dominating others or proving you're tough. It's about knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone treat you as if you're worth less. Joy had shown the opposite, that sometimes people mistake having power for being powerful, that sometimes people think being provocative is the same as being profound, that sometimes people are so caught up in their own importance that they forget to treat others with basic respect and decency. The studio audience would go home and tell this story. They'd talk about what they witnessed, about how they saw someone they admired stand up for themselves, about how they watched a host forget that her guests are people who deserve respect. The story would spread, the way these things always do, and people would talk about it at dinner tables and at work and everywhere stories are told. And in those retellings, the message would be clear. You can't build yourself up by tearing others down. You can't create something meaningful by destroying something beautiful. You can't earn respect by showing disrespect. These are simple truths, the kind of things that should be obvious, but somehow people keep forgetting them. Joy had forgotten them, if she ever knew them at all. She'd thought her show, her platform, her position gave her carte blanche to say whatever she wanted. She'd thought being the host meant she was in charge, that she could set the tone, that she could push her guests around. But she'd learned, in the most public way possible, that respect is a two-way street, and when you refuse to give it, eventually people stop giving it to you too. Dolly didn't owe Joy anything. She didn't owe her patience beyond what she'd already shown. She didn't owe her kindness after Joy had shown her none. She didn't owe her another second of her time, or energy, or grace. And so she took those things back, reclaimed them, and walked away with her head held high. That walk off that stage, that moment of decision, that act of self-respect, it was everything. It was Dolly saying, I value myself too much to sit here and be treated this way. It was her saying that kindness has limits, that grace has boundaries, that even the sweetest person in the world will eventually say, enough is enough. And she said it without screaming, without cursing, without losing her composure or her dignity. That's what made it so powerful. She didn't become what Joy was, trying to provoke her into becoming. She didn't get angry in a way that would make her look unreasonable. She didn't fight fire with fire. She simply stated her boundaries clearly, called out the behavior for what it was, and removed herself from the situation. That takes more strength than people realize, more courage than fighting back with the same weapons being used against you. Joy wanted a fight. She wanted drama. She wanted to create a moment that would get people talking. Well, she created one. Just not the kind she wanted. She created a moment where everyone watching got to see the difference between someone who uses their power responsibly and someone who abuses it. Between someone who treats others with respect and someone who doesn't. Between someone who builds people up and someone who tears them down. The cameras had captured it all. Every word, every expression, every moment of the confrontation. And that footage would be replayed, analyzed, discussed. People would watch Dolly's face as she realized what was happening. They'd see her trying to give Joy chances to change course. They'd watch her finally reach her limit. They'd see the walk-off, that powerful moment of choosing self-respect over people-pleasing. And they'd see Joy, too. They'd see the smirk that started it all. They'd see her doubling down when she should have backed off. They'd see her face when she realized Dolly was actually leaving, when she understood that she'd pushed too far and there was no taking it back. They'd see the desperation in her attempts to regain control, the understanding that she'd made a massive mistake. This wasn't how the interview was supposed to go. This wasn't what either of them had planned. Dolly had come to promote her work, to share some stories, to connect with an audience. Joy had presumably planned to have a conversation, though clearly somewhere along the way, she decided to make it something else entirely. And in making that decision, she'd created something she'd never be able to undo. Because you can't unring a bell. You can't take back words once they're spoken, especially when they're spoken on television in front of a live audience and broadcast to millions of people. Joy had shown her true colors, and no amount of backpedaling or explaining or justifying would change what everyone had seen with their own eyes. Dolly, meanwhile, had reinforced everything people already loved about her and added something new to it. She'd shown that her kindness comes from a place of choice, not weakness, that her grace is powerful, not passive, that beneath the wigs and the makeup and the sweet demeanor is a woman of steel who knows exactly who she is and won't let anyone tell her different. That's the story everyone would remember. Not whatever Joy had been trying to accomplish, not whatever point she thought she was making, not whatever controversy she thought she was creating. They'd remember Dolly standing up, removing her microphone, and walking away with her dignity intact. They'd remember her words, calm but devastating, calling out the behavior for exactly what it was. They'd remember that sometimes the kindest people are also the strongest, and that knowing when to walk away is just as important as knowing when to stand your ground. This was Joy's show, Joy's stage, Joy's moment that she controlled. But in the end, it was Dolly who controlled how it ended. It was Dolly who decided when enough was enough. It was Dolly who had the power to walk away and the courage to use it. And that's what people would talk about, long after the cameras stopped rolling and the audience went home and the lights in the studio went dark.